So did Georgia win the national championship in 2021 and 2022 with something beyond just their physical play? Did they win it with connection, a term that's been used a lot by Kirby Smart over the years, particularly recently? I wanted to talk about that as it relates to Bill Belichick, now the North Carolina head coach, releasing his book. It's called The Art of Winning: Lessons from My Life in Football, if I'm not mistaken. And an ESPN report talks about, and here I quote, instead, talking about the book, it's about something more interesting and revealing. It's largely a book about emotion, about emotional intelligence, about connection, and how a leader should treat people. So I want to get back to the 21 team real quick. The 21 team was the greatest defense in college football history. It had one game where they just did not play well. There's a lot of really good offenses in college football, perhaps some of the greatest of all time, that have not had good days. And I think that's what you could say about their loss to Alabama in Atlanta. I mean, they didn't play well, period. And I think that when you start thinking about, well, what's Bill Belichick got to do with anything here? Here's what he has to do with things. Like, for instance, the LSU team in 2019, they didn't even scored 4 touchdowns against Auburn down there. That was a really good Auburn defense, by the way. But back to the point. What does one have to do with the other? Where does Bill Belichick come from? Where does his coaching tree start? He's from Bill Parcells. Bill Parcells, Bill Belichick, Nick Saban, Kirby Smart. This is the same direct line. And that's the big thing. Does emotional connection, is it just about physicality? Is it just about this, that, and the other? No, I think it's about the combination of both the physicality that which you play with and not just the emotional intelligence, stability, but also the connectivity with your teammate. And if you are not getting along with your teammate, your coach, whatever, you have to be able to talk about that. And if you do not have a connection, you're not going to talk. I had to have a drink there. Sorry about that. So at the end of the day, that 21 team was loaded up defensively, and it had to navigate its way from one starting quarterback who was knocked out. Well, he wasn't knocked out, but he could not play after a while, to another one, Stetson Bennett, who really came on as the season went on. That was an older team. All right, check this out. Trustice.co. College football wagers you can do. Real quick, I'm just flipping through everything as I go here. You can see Champions League. You can see the Bundesliga, the NBA, all sorts of ways for you to responsibly bet. They've got it for you. UFC, Major League Baseball. Let's check out the Braves. There they are. And just click on any of this data and you can start today. Hey, check them out, have fun, and be responsible. Thanks for watching. The link is down below. Did its emotional stability, it's no longer having arrested development as players in emotion, could they have done that in 2019? I don't know. They handled it okay in 2020, but it wasn't unbelievable. Now, let's keep in mind, in 2020, the coaching staff was virtually the same as in 2021. A lot of the players were the same. Stetson Bennett, starting quarterback. The running back, Zamir White, James Cook. The offensive line was very, very similar. The wide receivers, I mean, you didn't have George Pickens for a lot of 2021, but you get my point. A lot of the players were the same. Now, you did bring in, Ladd McConkey was there, but he didn't play. And you had Brock Bowers. Did that make a difference? That did make a difference from 20 to 21. And then you talk about 22. What was the difference between 21 and 22? You lost a lot of your heartbeat on the defensive side of the ball. You lost Nakobe. You lost Jordan Davis. You lost Devontae Wyatt. You lost Trayvon Walker, who was the number 1 overall draft pick. Those 4 players weren't just really good players. These guys were smart. Look, we met those guys before they got to Georgia, okay? Devontae, Nakobe, Trayvon. Those were, I did not meet Jordan Davis, but I watched him play as a senior in high school. Nakobe Dean is an adult and has been an adult for a long time. When you think about, Trayvon? Trayvon's father was a Marine, Okay, so these guys were emotionally developed all the way through. They could handle a lot of stuff that was thrown at them by Kirby Smart and company. When you look at, the growth from the 21 to 22 team, Nolan Smith was still around. Stetson Bennett was still around, but it was Nolan. I think he mattered a lot in that 2022 team not leaving. So back to the Belichick book. It is not a surprise that one of the most successful coaches in history of coaching, when you talk about the great coaches in their sport, Phil Jackson, Red Auerbach, Bill Belichick, Bill Walsh, these guys were not just brilliant tacticians, which they were. Certainly Phil Jackson with the triangle. People don't understand the triangle offense, and that's fine. I'm not going to explain it right now. But that was different. But its core basics was you need what's called bread and butter. You need someone at all times around you. Bill Walsh pretty much was Steve Spurrier to the NFL. But if you do not have the ability to teach, if you do not have the ability for your players to coalesce around you, it's not going to happen. Gino Auriemma, Pat Summitt, Mike Krzyzewski, all of these coaches are not just great, quote, coaches, they're great teachers. So that's the challenge coming into 25 for Kirby Smart and company. You've had a lot of change this offseason. Everybody has. Carson Beck, not around anymore. And he was with the program for 5 seasons, okay? He was there in 2020 through COVID. So Carson has been a stabilizing force for these last couple of years and a really good player, certainly in 2023. He's gone. Now they have someone else who's been there for a long time in Gunnar Stockton. Now they have new players at wide receiver. All of these guys, in a matter of about 6 months, are going to have a connection. And what does that mean, okay? That means that like Oscar Delp, Lawson Lucky, and Gunnar can't just go do whatever they want to do and sort of ignore the rest of the team. That is the opposite of connection. When you have a connection with someone, think about your significant other, there was a reason why you were interested in them, whether it be that they were attractive, that they made you laugh, or both. Or in my case, I just had a lot of money, right? Not really. Not at all. So there's a reason that you have connection. When you do not have connection, you can see things spiral away, or they don't work the way they should. People will ask, well, what was wrong with the 24 team? Well, step one for most people will say Mike Bobo was a bad offensive coordinator. And to which I would respond, okay, well, why were they so good on offense in 2023 if that's the case? They played most of the same teams. They didn't play, Alabama, they scored more in Alabama in 24 than they did in 23. They, scored more in 23 and 24 on Ole Miss. They scored, the teams were the same. The players were different. And there was a little bit different feel to that 23 team. They were older. They felt older, at least. You still had Bowers. You still had McConkey. There were a lot of good players on that team that were still around from the 22 and 21 national championships. In 24, I think they had bad play at quarterback too often. It wasn't all the time. And I think Carson took too much grief sometimes, but sometimes he earned that grief. I think that the slow starts, well, that's on the coaching staff. That is on Mike and Kirby. That they've got to figure out how to do that. But now the thing with the quote slow starts, if the other team's not scoring, then there's it's not the end of the world at all. Clemson didn't score in the first half. Kentucky wasn't really scoring, but it did get to the point where Georgia, the Alabama game, they win that game if they don't let it get away in the first quarter, basically. So that was an issue that I think the coaching staff has to address. And the other thing, too, speaking of the coaches, connection can happen organically, but sometimes you can put the organisms in the right place in order to get them to respond to things. That's coaching. That's development. For all we hear about NIL, and all this stuff, and all this discussion of Georgia's not just going to pay for anybody. Well, then that means the coaches got to do their job. That means they've got to create connectivity when in a space, in a world in college football where there is money involved. For literally everybody that walks into that building at Georgia is getting paid, period. It's just what it is. Coaches, players, support staff, GAs. I mean, I got paid as a GA when I was at Georgia. You get paid. So it's just what it is. But, everyone's making money, so there's a responsibility for everyone to come together. It does not have to be organic, but that's better than not. An inorganic can be fake, and there has to be a breakthrough. And as a person who's run an organization with young people in it for, a quarter century, that's hard. That is a hard thing to do, is to break through to someone in a short amount of time when their confidence is not always the greatest on earth. Everybody looks at these players and they say, oh my gosh, he must have tons of confidence. That, Division I football player. Not always. I mean, because they go through stuff too. They're not playing well that day. They're not having a good day. How do they get around that? All of those things are really important in terms of figuring out what's next for all of these players. But I did want to talk about connectivity. Bill Belichick talking about it in his latest book. I think it directly ties to Georgia and what they're trying to do, obviously at Carolina, and what Belichick's trying to do. But if you can get that in your life and you can get that on a team, that's hard, man. That's not always the easiest thing on earth to pull off, okay? If you can pull that off, you'll have a successful team more often than not. Thanks for watching.